Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to another live stream of Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel and video game news. Today is Wednesday, May the 17th. So they've added some new accessories and they started this World Tour Challenge. What is it called? World Championship event. Arguably, if I've ever complained about the fact that they've had events over here that were listed a week before they actually started or were listed a week after they ended, if I ever complained about that, I was 100% wrong, because they did not do that in this case. And so even though I saw in the notice that it was going to start, it just didn't really have that feeling like it was actually going to start. It felt more like it was a typo. We'll jump into the World Championship in a second here. Because of my ranking, I started on Duelist level 7, so it just skipped me ahead and gave me a special reward ticket, which I guess we could open, and a special qualifiers packet, and 400 gems. Well, another 3 special reward tickets too. And then because I had files moving over, which that's finally finished, but I also need to do a little bit of cleanup still there. It's just try and delete some old files from the backups that aren't really necessary to have so many copies of, which is probably a stupid idea. You probably just keep a copy of everything. But since I had that extra time, and since I was not really doing anything else, I played off screen to get up to level 10. There's still 10 more levels to get to, but there's also kind of a decent amount of time in 11 days to get to that point. That being said, the first part here may not actually be 11 days. Like, let's see. Stage 1 ends. Apparently not at any specific time. They're being real serious about not cheating. Since this is trying to be a real championship. Whereas I don't think they'd be as serious, or at least gamers who cheat think they wouldn't be that serious. Interesting. Yeah, the 25th is the regional qualifier rounds. So you have up until the 25th to get to the end of stage 1, rank 20, which hopefully we would get there. But let's be honest here, it's not like I'm particularly good at Yu-Gi-Oh! I'm not gonna really get into anything that's a real world championship. I'm not gonna like it would be, maybe I could get into top 10,000 and get 10 more tickets, sure. If I could get above the top 10,000 and get a bronze finalist and a title and 10 more tickets, honestly, the 10 more tickets would be the more interesting thing there. But to get into like the top 1,000 and well, that's weird that they have 2 bronze tiers. So you have like a top 1,000 title versus top 10,000 title. Yeah, if you could get in the top 1,000, that'd be great. But then you're getting really crazy if you're talking about getting into the top 500. Wow, there's like 3 tiers of bronze. Or the top 100 to get to silver is not realistic. Unless there was just a significantly large amount of really, really bad. No, I guess it really wouldn't even be a case of there being a large amount of really, really bad Yu-Gi-Oh! Players. It would have to be a case of very few good Yu-Gi-Oh! Players, and that's just not realistic. We're talking a card game that's 25 years old, and people have been playing basically for that entire time. There's no reason for me to succeed at that level. So we got the daily login for the road to the World Championship. There is a long list of actions that need to be taken in the next 11 days. Winning or just dueling in general, you know, honestly, I might get to rank 20 before I even have to duel 50 times. We have also got daily quests, which those will overlap. Log in, and a new duel live. So let's go ahead and just clean up to start with and see how much progress we can make today. Yeah. And I guess now, since all missions will be at the top, there's just no real way to toggle off the road or the discovery missions in particular. Those are going to constantly be listed as checked. Whereas everything else, once you have like a full bar, disappears. Yeah. So at some point in the future, you may get all of the lifetime stuff done, and you still would have at the bottom of this list the discovery stuff. Which they really, that just highlights a need for also, of course, making progress here, a button somewhere to toggle off or hide completed things. So, new accessories. Go ahead and buy, what is this, a Sprite Blue. Endless Engine, I guess, themed card. And then I assume that's pretty much it. And I think it mostly would make a lot of sense to not bother to open any packs until I'm back up to like 6,000 as far as selection packs, even though there is, I think, still a pretty good argument to opening at least 30 packs here. No secret packs at the moment. And we're in this weird position now where I need to always open as much here because I can't open it in packs of 10 anymore. Or if there is a way to open it in packs of 10, I haven't figured out what the trick to that is. It definitely seems like they are trying to rush players into owning the legacy cards, which is probably an admittance on their own part that they really should have just given these legacy cards for free to every player. It would have been so much smarter to say, hey, for every 20 minutes you play in the game, we're going to just give you a random legacy card. And so everybody eventually, if you just play long enough, will get that amount. So does that inherently mean I have to open 5 packs here? Seems like that is the case. Now, what are the cards that are included in this pack? We see there's 4 ultra rares. Jinzo's recognizable, Penguin Brave. Number 3, Cicadia King. And try and guess. Jinzo is the only one I recognize, which means it's probably the only particularly old card. And in fairness, I'm thinking of this Jinzo, which is an older card, not this evolved form of Jinzo. Which that highlights what they probably should have done with a lot more of their original cards, is to try and bring them back. And they do some of that with like Rydo. and Jinzo, things that would have shown up in the anime, but they didn't certainly do it with all the cards. And a lot of the older cards, I guess, are just not that recognizable. I'm not really seeing, though, anything here that jumps out as being, oh, this is a top tier card, particularly since right now everybody's playing the tier laments to great success and basically nothing else. And I really should just make a tier laments deck. But yeah, this seems to be just a kind of collection of cards. Nothing particularly special about them. Card packs that can be purchased with tickets. Get some nostalgic and interesting cards to commemorate this event. They're not even promising that the cards are useful. And there's not really going to be any guarantees here. That's a good start, certainly, to get a foil ultra rare. But yeah, no real guarantees that if you didn't get an ultra rare and you opened 10 packs, you'd then be guaranteed an ultra rare in the next 10 packs. And I don't think I'm even going to get enough of these packs to get 10 packs, let alone 20. It's perhaps a smart move, if on one thought, that these cards aren't going to particularly be game changers, because it would be kind of unfair to open one of these packs and then get the one card you need to get way higher in your championship challenge. That would perhaps, not unfair is the wrong word, it would just be incredibly luck based. I suppose that is an interesting aspect of the Yu-Gi-Oh cartoon, at least the first anime series, in that there definitely were points where the Yugi was winning better cards by defeating other people, and they were doing their whole gambling aspect, where in contrast, now that they tend not to try to promote the idea of the gambling, there's a whole new load in here that they added. It doesn't change much, it's just visual. But yeah, the idea of not winning cards and gambling in the games, but instead getting cards through packs, is not something that I've really seen ever promoted or shown. As far as a collectible card game or anime inspired collectible and card game. I guess it would probably feel too much like a cop out to say show in Yu-Gi-Oh episodes that Yugi is rich and he's just opening tons of packs, and that's how he's getting all of his cards, is that he has just incredible luck opening packs and getting cards. Which, ironically, that makes the Yu-Gi-Oh anime series feel much more like a deck building series than an actual collectible card game. because they never really engage or show much focus on the aspect of the loot box aspect and the gambling aspect of opening blind boxes, blind bags, to try to get better cards. They also never really show people building new decks or looking at cards and thinking about building new decks. Let's see, do I want to summon that? This guy is effectively already lost. Like, worst case scenario, he does a Mirror Force type card as a trap when I attack and destroys this character. He's got 2 trap cards set, he's got nothing in his hand, he's basically got no options. And obviously he can trigger something at the beginning of the battle phase, otherwise the game wouldn't let him stall the game like this. Once again, I'm going to be busy tomorrow, so I won't get back to LEGO DC Supervillains, which I really need to get back to that yet again. This has been like the worst experience so far of just not focusing. So 2 legacy packs, which is quite a lot, and 8 gems, which is arguably not enough. Yeah. I hope this isn't just an increased trend on my part, certainly, of getting distracted and going back. I'd put up these smart LED Christmas lights. They were kind of more designed to be on Christmas trees than outside, and I had just gotten them hung up. They had been poorly drooped outside for a couple months, perfectly fine and working, and then I had just put them up hanging on clips on the underside of the roof. So, and now one has broken. What I suspect has happened, and I don't know the exact source, is that one of the diodes burnt out, and when the diodes burnt out, they often will short depending on the type of LEDs in them and the wiring. These are 2811Bs, I believe, individually addressable LEDs, which, as far as this whole idea, the fact that it's individually addressable, that you can change the colors and do different patterns, and it has a decent controller, I won't say good, for that with different patterns pre-programmed in, really elevates the idea of having Christmas lights all year round and being able to change the colors and make them more regionally appropriate, instead of just being doing the old thing, which would have been just to leave Christmas lights up and then not turn them on except for during the month of December, which doesn't really quite give it as much value as it really should. And so, yeah, they were working for a couple months drooped. As soon as they got clipped up, it's only been a couple weeks that they've been on the clip on the underside of roofing tiles, and one of the 2 strands which were split, which you're supposed to be able to do that, or at least electronically you should be able to do that, seems to have burned out. I think one LED shorted, and then very quickly that changes the current calculation, because these LEDs use a lot of current. They all stay at 5 volts, which arguably there probably should be a better chipset that runs at 12 or 24 volts. instead, or at least is capable of running at 12 or 24 volts. And there are chipsets that do run at that, but they're not quite as good. So there is just kind of a argument for more. I probably should have read ahead. No, he's activating traps out of the graveyard. He's not activating monsters. So me eliminating cards wouldn't really do anything. Yeah, so one LED shorted out. That changed the current process, probably putting more of a current strain on the rest of them, which caused the next one to short out, which then creates this very quick cascading effect. Honestly, this potentially happened over the course of just a few minutes in the middle of the night. So, yeah. I went out there, I noticed that none of the lights were working because even the second strand was being pulled down in a voltage, which arguably maybe the 2811Bs aren't shorting out to increase the current as much as they're shorting out to decrease the current, which would be a better way for things to be handled. And obviously I didn't know what originally was happening, so I tried all kinds of different things to see if the wiring was loose or if the wiring went bad. Eventually, after spending an hour or two trying to diagnose it, I had to take the entire strand that had just been put up on the roof down. Easier certainly to just yank and rip Christmas light strands down than it is to have a ladder to put it back up. See if we can destroy Relinquished. See if we can go ahead and activate an effect here. And so then I started to chop up the LED strips, which for those kinds you should be able to do that. You should be able to just cut any one LED off the beginning or end off and see if possibly that would have been the problem, which there's definitely an argument that the first one in the circuit should be the problem, or the last one in the circuit should be the problem if there was a water damage or short circuit. And almost certainly, yes, the first one in the circuit was the first one to burn out, but I didn't get anywhere with it. I do know that the LEDs on the roof were folded back just to hide the extra, and so it's possible that even having two of the LEDs just on top of each other created a situation where they overheated each other, because they definitely can get hot. I mean, it hasn't been an incredibly hot spring so far, but on a roof 10, 20, 30 degrees hotter, it's possible that they overheated. It's possible that water got into them because it wasn't particularly the best waterproofing setup, although I didn't really see any indication of damage. I did see that one light looked like it had roofing tar on it, so it's possible that light got overheated. I mean, almost certainly it was originally a heating issue that caused it to short out, because it wouldn't have roofing tar on it unless the roofing tar was hot enough to still be hot and sticky. So yeah, but this is a shame because this was one of a decreasing number of projects that I'm like actually accomplishing all the way through to any level of success versus just giving up on projects halfway through. And certainly it can be very frustrating. Well, I guess at some point I was supposed to have summoned Zeus and I forgot to do that, but I guess it doesn't matter. So far, these battles in the championship have been kind of pushover battles. I assume there's just a lot of people that want to be involved. And even though their decks aren't particularly that good, I bet there is probably a good percentage, 12-15% of players that just don't play in ranked or just don't have good decks of any kind. And I definitely could have been in that category as far as Yu-Gi-Oh! If I hadn't gone online and looked up a recipe for Zodiac Tri-Brigade. I definitely would have just been playing a pre-built deck at that point and losing very much, almost always. So, yeah, the LEDs broke. My only other thought as far as heating issue is maybe it was a current issue. Maybe there was just not enough current going through, and that over time created a bigger issue. I'm gonna do this and do this and be a little sneaky, and then in the turn. Yeah, so I was thinking I was just gonna wait till after Christmas, but when I started to look at trying to find replacement parts, like the fact that you could get any Christmas lights for sale at this point in the middle of the year or at the beginning of the year is kind of crazy. And wow, this guy cannot play anything, or he's just trying to trigger this. Let's just have no actions for like several moves. I assume it would be a draw if just neither person played. Or maybe he's got some crazy strategy that he just started. So, but yeah, it would be kind of crazy for it to not work for half the year. Because then the overall experiment of having Christmas lights around the whole year and seeing how many seasons that would work on starts to fall apart. Let's just cancel that. Let's see if that ruins his special summon. His effects activated before mine did. That's weird. But yeah, if I didn't try and fix it now, it would ruin the experiment and delay the experiment for at least half a year, just to see, will this ever work? Like all smart devices, particularly since this is the 2U Smart Life devices, it'd be nice if the controller was a thread controller. It wouldn't be too much once one of those exists to swap things out. So the actual LED strands aren't really an issue there as much as the controller is. But it'd be nice if it wasn't just yet another Wi-Fi device that it's connecting. Although, in comparison, having hundreds of little LED Christmas lights controlled by one controller is nothing compared to having like dozen single bulbs controlled by individual Wi-Fi controllers. But yeah. So it was a twofold reasoning that caused me to say, hey, I better fix this now, or try to fix this now. Now, noticeably, I also have to admit that it was my neighbor who brought his ladder over since I got rid of mine, that hung up the Christmas lights and was very kind to do that. And within a week, I've now ripped them down. So I seriously doubt he's going to be super happy to hang the Christmas lights once again. But yeah, I guess the only thing I could say at the moment is get extension power injection wires and do it even at the end of a single strand. There's a nice little snap T there, and I'm gonna probably try and heat shrink over the whole connection after that, although that may be a mistake too. I'd also say heat shrink the very end of any LEDs wires anyways, just for extra safety. That would almost certainly be a smart move to go with. Also, it's just to try to add as much waterproofing. And the types of LEDs that I've gotten are really just little, look like glue blobs connecting the wires together, whereas it probably would make a lot more sense to have much bigger but far fewer light bulb looking LEDs, which they sell those. Fewer LEDs in general is probably the best way to go because of the power issue. So you're going to have like a fairly sparse experience, or relatively sparse. You're not going to be able to have a LED every 1 inch apart. It is also worth mentioning for anybody who cares about this, which is, I bet, not that many since it has nothing to do with video games. A timer might do you way better. If you can find a nice strand that has some nice patterns that you like, and those patterns can work generally 365 days out of the year, or if you go only white, so just solid white Christmas lights, they don't even have to be LEDs, a smart plug on that strand might get you 45% of the way there. It doesn't give you the fancy patterns and the colors, certainly, and those are very nice, but just being able to have your lights around year round, and then they come on at night and they go off. Although at a certain point, do you even need a smart timer, a smart plug at that point? Because you're not getting anything new with a smart plug versus just a good old-fashioned timer plug. Like, you couldn't program something to come on and come off at a very fast speed. That would almost certainly ruin electricity. Either ruin the socket or ruin the bulbs if you're trying to flick the power via a smart switch every like 5 seconds, or every second, or half a second, or something really fast like that. Despite my attempts to ruin his strategy, he still managed to get enough to do a one-turn kill. And if anything, that probably is a statement on how my deck, if I get the bad cards, does not play well and is probably a little unbalanced. Otherwise, for the accountability section, I haven't been doing too much. I've been thinking with the writer's strike, what if you were really smart, I think it's this company Substack was just formed as far as a comic book company owned by comic book people, trying to be an independent competition to Warner Brothers owned DC and Disney owned Marvel. So, like, both DC and Marvel could also do this, but they wouldn't, because inherently being owned by Disney or Warner Brothers is going to make them very, very much anti-union. But Substack is in a very interesting point here, where if they potentially sell their soul as a corporation, and by that I mean gain an actual soul as a corporation, and say, hey, we're going to be very, very union friendly type shop, and we're going to pay WGA a agreed upon like WGA rights, and we're going to only hire WGA writers. If you could negotiate some kind of deal like that, and it would be very much you trying to get a really good deal from the WGA while they're in the middle of striking and negotiating, you could scoop up a lot of writers and take the writers for movies and TVs that are striking right now and not writing for TV shows and movies, and say, hey, why don't you come over here and write spec scripts or write for us for comic books instead, and why don't we just gain this massive amount of talent of people who very possibly would never have deigned to write, and maybe you're just gaining them at the moment to write for you while they're striking, because it is totally acceptable to work another job in another industry when you're striking. You're only usually asked to strike stand at the picket line for a certain number of hours a day, and you're usually just like scheduled that, and you get paid to picket by unions, most usually. That's my understanding of it. So you could get like a lot of writers up there. Here you can definitely see how this seems too easy. It's just a lot of people disconnecting. I don't know if that's possibly a bunch of bots. I can't really blame my network. My network has been on the new router. I haven't had any dropouts or anything like that. I have seen some QoS issues, so I will turn on the QoS when I get around to it over the weekend. I'm trying not to work on the network during the week. It doesn't seem like it's really made the Wi-Fi Tuya devices work better as far as range or as far as their own buggy programming, but it certainly hasn't made it worse. But yeah, I don't know why we're seeing as many disconnects, but we are. But anyways, yeah, I think Substack could pull off an almost genius move there, get some writers and bring them into the idea of being writers every now and then for comics, and try to massively improve the amount of writing. Now, here is where that idea has its major caveat. First of all, you have to assume that writers for TV shows and movies are in any way the same, as good or better than writers for comic books. Which I would argue that the general average writer for a TV show probably is slightly better than a writer on a comic book, because you inherently have to just assume the writers on comic books aren't that good, with a few exceptions, in that they are writing less lines of dialogue. It is very much an apples to oranges comparison. Like 1 month of work as far as a comic book is to write like 16 comic book pages worth of dialogue, whereas a writer in a TV show usually has to write an episode within less than a week, and in that episode you're definitely probably doing somewhere, I would say at least 30 pages to maybe even 200 pages worth of dialogue. But even in saying pages, it's not apples to apples. 16 comic book pages is probably the equivalent of like 2 pages of what you would write in just a regular writing vernacular. So, yeah, I do suspect that TV writers could write a lot more, and inherently just by writing a lot more, I suspect they would be better. That being said, there is also the caveat that the amount of writing may be better, done faster and more efficiently in TV shows on a weekly basis. But the expectations of quality in an individual episode of a TV show may be considerably less. Like an individual episode of NCIS can be pretty bad and nobody cares because there'll just be another one next week. If there is a really, really bad comic book, then people have to live with that bad comic book issue for an entire month. Also, TV shows are written in writer rooms, so it's not usually one person writing an episode. It's usually like 4, 5, 6 people sitting around bouncing ideas off of each other, writing a story. And so you definitely couldn't do that in comics. It wouldn't be the worst idea to try it, certainly, but you would almost have to start making comics on a weekly basis to justify having a writing room of 5 or 6 people working together to write a comic. Honestly, though, that's not a terrible thought. Like, the idea of a single person writing an entire story arc has created these long-running arcs of 1 or 2 years written by one person, and if the comic book reader likes that person, that's great, but if the comic book doesn't write that story, they don't like that writer's style, they don't like the direction the story is going, then you lose that fan for that series pretty much forever. Now, unfortunately, if you were to say bring in a bunch of striking WGA people to Substack, and this is all just headcanon fiction, like this is just a thought experiment. If you were to bring in the writers and they actually could write comic books and do a great job, which I think there's a decent chance to experiment there, you could only bring in so many. So you probably are talking 5 or 6 people to say, hey, we're going to bring in these guys. They're going to possibly give a little bit more work to their friends in the union, but mostly it's just going to be these 5, 6 people, and they're going to work together in the writing room, and they're going to write stories for us to potentially get to a point where maybe a year in the future we will be putting out a comic book every single week, even maybe twice a week, which that'd be fairly expensive too for people if you're paying, like, it's not super expensive, particularly if you had it on a subscription fee. If you're paying $30 a month and you're getting 4 comics that month, that's not terrible. But obviously you're not going to have striking artists or inkers or pencilers, so, and you can't in this idea say, alright, well, we'll just use AI generated art for the art and we'll just give the writers their own work, because that's one of the things that they're striking about, is that they don't want artists to lose their jobs to artificial intelligence. So you would have to severely scale up and pay artists to draw a lot more, hire a lot more artists in general. Okay, I'm gonna hope this works. It's probably a bad position to put that in. But yeah, I guess that was just something I was thinking about, though. Yeah, I guess there's nothing more you could do there. Like, in DC, Marvel could do the same, but they're anti-union, so hiring striking union members would be crazy. It would also probably piss off a lot of the existing writers in DC and Marvel, which you really can't do. Whereas potentially bringing in or inviting in a bunch of people to Substack wouldn't piss off as many people. You would have, this really would be one of those actions like early days Netflix, where you would just put an infinite amount of money into it. And certainly a service like Netflix could do the exact same thing anyways. Netflix could be hiring these striking writers to significantly improve their proposals and their writings and have more episodic type shows, which Netflix does kind of lack. Like, for as much as people love Friends and want to watch Friends and The Office over and over again, they are very noticeably low on making new shows that are like Friends or The Office. Netflix very much either tries to make comedy shows or drama shows. They don't try to make Friends and Office type comedy shows. Like, the last one they did try to do was probably Arrested Development. And even Arrested Development is kind of more of a drama than anything. Okay. Do we have this? I think it's going to severely depend on what happens here. Let's go ahead and special summon, say, this and this. My goal here being to have a stronger character on the field, and this may be a very roundabout way of doing this. Okay, so we activate this at that point to special summon this, face up defense mode, point to that, then we special summon this. Here. I'm just activating a lot of things for no good reason. And what I'm doing now is arguably very dangerous, and that at any point I could screw this up and then run out of options. And arguably I could have done some of that before I attacked. Yeah. Perhaps I should have read what that card was going to do, so I actually knew what was going to happen. He does have two cards. If he couldn't play either one of them, that'd be weird. So I've just been defeated because of that one card in the graveyard. My only hope would be possibly to negate this effect and reduce his attack to below 1900. So even from the graveyard, it seems like he had a lot of options. So yeah, overall though, we're in this weird position where when everything goes nicely like this, I want to just keep on playing. But I have been rambling for about an hour, so I really shouldn't be rambling either. I really need to find a different way to run this first part of this show, this almost pre-show part of it. But yeah, I definitely have it within me at the moment, and I may get tired later, to keep on playing and keep on working towards rank 20, but I think it is probably smart to focus instead on just moving through the news, because we do have a decent amount of news. Obviously I need to make some more YouTube shorts. So still spells and traps need to be activated. Still lots of summons and normal summons, and kind of far ahead, 15 more wins needed, and then just a lot more duels. Inherently, either I'm going to get to stage 2 and continue to make progress from stage 2 on these, or I'm going to get all the way to the top of stage 1 and still need to play some more. Another 450 gems, putting us kind of close to that 6,000 mark, although It's also not really necessary to open packs here if we are just also getting bonus packs here to open and bonus packs here to open. And these 10 packs are coming very fast and furious. Definitely feels like they want to create a situation where legacy packs either are absolutely worthless or they can stop giving away legacy packs. I could definitely see an argument to maybe saying legacy packs for 2024 would be different legacy packs than before, and that there would just be a second series of old cards that that they start giving away quite a bit. However, if we go over here and dismantle all extra cards, how much crafting points did we really get? 10 normals, 10 rares. So we aren't really getting extra crafting points in this whole process. Alright, well, then let's just start talking about the news. Like, inevitably, one of the things, though, is if I'm not playing and I'm talking about news stories that I really don't need to show on the screen, I get into this awkward situation where I have to potentially blur out the screen more than I want to. Alright, let's see. Alright. So, there's not seemingly a great reason for this other than Steam Deck is being treated more like an actual product, but they have released a new Steam Deck video. It's a 30-second video, and frankly, show don't tell. You can see that there is a lot of reviews there, although noticeably they did point out Chunky as another review. Noticeably also, the latest Steam sale was introduced by that male-female team who seem to be the new faces of Steam. They definitely seem like they are pushing it. This is all these are positive except for the last one that says Chunky, which is not so positive. It's an interesting comparison here to have a Steam Deck in a car next to an infotainment system that potentially could also be a screen to play video games, although car infotainment systems tend not to want to do that. And this is kind of a great example of the problem of sedan and smaller cars with big infotainment systems. They are just not designed to have giant screens in the middle, and legally they're not allowed to block the window, so you can see how the edge of the window is exactly in line at this angle with the top of the screen. But yeah, it definitely seems to me like they are treating this like a product and actually doing advertisements, which is something Valve really didn't do for the Oculus 5 or the VR stuff. As well, they probably did make some advertisements, but it probably was a little bit more nerdy and more technical. And whereas this feels very much like we're going to make an ad that looks like the Nintendo Switch and feels like the Nintendo Switch and is speaking to people who would want to have a device that looks like the Nintendo Switch or feels like a better version of that. It'll be interesting certainly to see what the next Nintendo console looks like and see if the Steam Deck is anything close to that. This isn't really though an announcement of anything. It's not improved versions, lower price, or anything like that. You could have imagined that maybe that ad would have had a lower price announcement on it. If anything, it's maybe an announcement of more availability. Now, there was something else there that caught my eye, and I've forgotten what I was going to say, so probably I'm going to have to just move forward. Tears of the Kingdom has established great success for itself, and unfortunately established a new standard in being able to make a $70 game running on the Nintendo Switch, the weakest of the consoles, and people being willing to buy it. Now, arguably, you could always say, well, that's because it's Zelda, and Zelda is one of the best series ever, and it's coming right off the heels of Breath of the Wild, which was very popular, even though I personally didn't finish it or like it. But yeah, it definitely establishes a precedent in a lot of people's minds, or at least a justification in a lot of publishers' minds, that $70 is the way to go. Which people aren't getting paid more, and $70 doesn't feel like it is less money than it felt like it was a couple of years ago, or 10 years ago, or 20 years ago. Heck, when I was a kid, if you'd given me $70, you would have effectively given me $1 million, as much as the smaller amount of things I could buy. That is an interesting thought experiment. When I was a kid, if you had handed me cash, there would have been no internet to speak of. I wouldn't have had internet access. The internet would have existed in some form. The internet is actually particularly old, but there really wouldn't have been a World Wide Web or a website, and there wouldn't have been a place where you could really spend money or a way to send money, because I wouldn't have had any kind of checking or credit cards, so or anything like that. So yeah, if you were going to send money, you would have had to send it via Western Union to a place, or mail a check in the mail to somebody. So I couldn't have bought anything online, so I could have only gone to toy stores, and there would have been maybe 1 or 2 toy stores in my area. I would have had to have some parent drive me there, or somebody else drive me there. And with $70 burning a hole in my pocket at a toy store, I could have probably bought quite a bit of toys, or at least 2 or 3 video games. If they were brand new AAA games, I could have probably bought 5 or 6 if they were kind of bad games. So yeah, $70 is a lot of money back then, and it felt like it still feels like a lot of money today to modern parents and of a new generation. But yeah, that's weirdly the only thing I really have to say about Tears of the Kingdom. It seems to be reviewed very well, but nobody's really spoiling anything or finding any flaws in it, so I'm not really expecting too much flaws to show up. Unity for Games had a long tweet thread here. Are you a student looking to advance your career in Unity? We've gathered a list of resources for a good start. And then they retweet a long list here. A GitHub repo for best practices. Follow their blog. Creator spotlights that they're doing on their YouTube channel. Forum. And then asset store. Use the asset store. So the problem with this tweet thread is just what I would imagine, a massive lack of understanding of how Twitter works. for Unity for games, because it would have made a lot more sense to just put out a single tweet that would have been seen by all that says, are you a student looking to advance your career in Unity? Follow Unity for Students, and make a new Twitter account, and then have them get notifications like this over the course of a longer period of time, putting out a tweet every couple weeks. Or if you don't want to make another Twitter account, I mean, since they already have the gold check mark, they could get another Unity for Students account pretty easily with a blue check mark. But if they didn't want to make a new Twitter account, they could have just said, make sure you follow us over the next couple of weeks, and we'll slowly trickle out suggestions and ideas instead of just putting it all out once. This feels like they had an advertisement company say, put out all this information, and then that advertisement company didn't really understand how Twitter works, so they said, no, put it all out at once. But the vast majority of people are just going to see this original tweet, and then the entire thread is going to be truncated down to the last two tweets. So 2 through 5 completely overlooked. Plus, in fairness, these are not the best suggestions, really. They're not in-depth, detailed suggestions by any means. They're very, very generic. Moving on, BlizzCon is returning in November. This will be the convention's first in-person event since 2019. I guess it probably makes sense for Activision Blizzard to continue to try and do BlizzCon. It seems like they made a lot of money either selling digital tickets when they weren't in person or selling tickets to BlizzCon, and they had, I think, a pretty great scam going where you would get a exclusive mount if you bought a digital ticket or went to BlizzCon in World of Warcraft, and people really were interested in that idea. That being said, here we can see a picture of the old BlizzCons, previous BlizzCons, and you have Overwatch, which is dead, replaced with Overwatch 2. You have Hearthstone, which is mostly dead, but still around. I think this is probably Heroes of the Storm, which I think is pretty dead. This might also be Heroes of the Storm, but if it isn't, I can't even tell by the character or the icon font. This, I guess, could be StarCraft. If this is StarCraft, that's dead. If this is Heroes of the Storm, that's pretty dead. Then you have Warcraft, which is dead. Then you have World of Warcraft, which still exists. And then you have Diablo, which still exists. So you have more dead franchises or replaced franchises in the case of Overwatch 2 than you have thriving, successful franchises. You pretty much should just draw a line through here, StarCraft and Hearthstone and Heroes of the Storm and Warcraft, and really just would have a BlizzCon around Overwatch 2, World of Warcraft, and Diablo. On top of that, they just canceled a lot of the single player versus event type content for Overwatch 2. They've just given up on it completely, saying basically Overwatch 2 is going to be exclusively player versus player, which honestly I would have told you it was exclusively player versus player always, and I don't know if there ever was any kind of player versus event or single player like content in Overwatch 1, but it definitely never struck me in my mind that any part of Overwatch would be anything other than team-based player versus player type content. Moving on, EA's college football rival will pay football. Um, what does FBS stand for? I don't know. Players for the likeness. FBS is college football people. Now, they're saying this like this gets them good press, but inherently this just highlights the fact that EA was not paying people, college football people, for their likeness, and EA was at least complicit in the fact that football players, under their rules that they can't make any money at all, which is, I mean, man, it may be fancy slavery, but it's certainly slavery when you're saying you can be on $1 million making video game, have your likeness on $1 million video game, but you can't get any money for that whatsoever. Otherwise, you would be technically a professional football. Otherwise, thus you can't be in the college football leagues. And inherently, that rule was just ridiculous, anyways, because people were getting all kinds of kickbacks and gifts and things. Anyway, so there was, or at least promises. You're really not weeding out any corruption. You're just like keeping all the money themselves, and that's inherently the part that needs to be pointed out. That's the big point to be pointed out, is that FBS and the NCAA football were getting paid for the likenesses of college football people, but they were not passing that money down to the people who actually own those likenesses. And at a certain point, this isn't a great example of author rights and just like moral rights that the European Union and Europeans think about in their law system, to say, hey, wait a minute, this person can't just enter into such a terrible deal like this that they could for their entire life sell their likeness when they're a college kid and allow somebody to some other corporation to profit off of it for their forever. As far as moral rights, I think that's the phrase, is moral rights. And that's the same thing with the Witcher author, is that he definitely was claiming that he sold the Witcher books and the rights to turn that into a video game as a concept at a very low price, and CD Projekt Red should pay him a higher price because now the Witcher books have become way more popular. And in the Witcher's case, I think the Witcher books became very popular on their own, in part, not exclusively through the video game's popularity, because it's not like Witcher 1 and 2 were that popular. But yeah, don't take this as a good thing. This is literally a neutral news story. They are doing what they should have been doing from the beginning, only because the NCAA people finally were forced to actually pay the actual football people for their likenesses and their rights. Now, there is also a counter argument that could be made that how important is it really for somebody to look like anybody recognizable in a football game? You could very easily just make random AI generated people that have random names and have a football game and have that football game last multiple seasons of football instead of trying to sell the same game over and over again every year. The stats are pretty much made up. So if I was a competitor to EA and I wanted to make a college football type game or a football type game, I would not pay people for their rights, because I wouldn't think that that's that valuable. I would have silly, randomly generated people playing with random stats, and I would work to making the best football game possible. And we probably would just make a custom character customizer where you could make your own characters if you wanted to. But yeah, it's so easy to make EA the bad guy, and in this case I still think EA really is trying to make themselves look like they aren't the bad guy when they definitely have been complicit with the NCAA, who's the real bad guy, who have been holding down these college football people, and withholding opportunity from them to profit from their own likeness. Moving on, I didn't like The Expanse, but seems like a decent enough people do. Also on Amazon Prime Video is the Mario movie. If you missed it in theaters, I didn't want to watch it in theaters. But the Telltale, I believe this is the conclusion of The Expanse in video game form. Game has a release date now of being in July 27th for PS4, PS5, Xbox Series X, Xbox One, and PC via the Epic Games Store, not Steam. Yeah, I assume that this is a new story that wraps up the TV show, or it's a side story to the TV show. It very well may be a side story to the TV show, not a wrap up. But I don't think there's going to be any more of The Expanse in live action made. And I'm definitely filled with a little bit of sadness as far as my love of sci-fi, which is definitely not universal, in that every time somebody tries to do a new sci-fi series, it flops fairly terribly and never gains the groundswell fandom that it feels like it should. There just aren't that many sci-fi fans out there, frankly, and they've all been divided into being obsessed with Star Wars or Star Trek so much that they won't give anything new a chance, or stick with anything long enough. Yeah. Of course, there are new Star Trek series and maybe a new type of sci-fi fan that are enjoying those series, but I don't know if they are rabid enough fans for what sci-fi really needs. I think the biggest problem is that there aren't just enough sci-fi fans in executive positions that make the decision whether to cancel a show or not, in video game, in TV and movie production. Moving on, Nintendo is delisting Pac-Man 99 later this year. This would be 2 years after it was just over 2 years after it was released. Once again, highlighting that Nintendo has zero concern for having any kind of online service that's worth anything, or any kind of online servers or process like that. This could be the beginning of the end, and we start to see them delist or shut down servers for all the Switch games very abruptly and very quickly, although it's insane that they're doing this before they even announce a new console. You could maybe argue that these servers were particularly poorly programmed and they just did require a lot of maintenance, but honestly I don't think it was that much. I think this is just a case where the accountants at Nintendo see that it's costing them some amount of money, even if it's an insignificantly small amount of money, to run servers, and so they said, we don't want to spend that money, let's just shut down the service. And At no point in Nintendo does it seem like the advertising departments ever get invited to meetings, because if Nintendo did have an advertising department, they would say, wait a minute, this is bad for public relations and this is going to be received incredibly poorly. 2 years for an online only game is far too short. And there definitely is an argument that there should be some laws out there. I could see the EU saying, hey, if you're going to make an online game, you have to either refund everybody when the servers are shut down before 5 years. 5 years would be, I guess, a good point to say, hey, you either refund every single person the full amount of what they paid if you shut down the servers and your game is more than 51% online content, or you have to continue to run the servers. It could be something as easy as that you could just have to force companies to refund. But yeah, Nintendo clearly not trustworthy as far as online services, and or just trying to maintain the happiness of its fandom. That being said, people will almost certainly not even hear this news because they'll be too busy playing Tears of the Kingdom, so they scheduled it pretty nicely. Darkest Dungeon 2 has sold over 500,000 copies since it entered its early access release, which, yeah, shows that there is a rabid fandom that's still there. Star Wars Jedi Survivor latest patch hits PC and console soon. Work is continuing to improve the overall performance. This is the 5th patch so far. Valve is also being sued after just putting out that video over the Steam Deck and the Valve Index haptic tech. Immersion Corporation, which has a history of suing major hardware manufacturers, has filed a lawsuit against the company. Has Immersion Corporation won any of these lawsuits? But inherently, this has been a long-running issue in that you have these patent trolls, these non-acting companies that have no products or a product that nobody uses, having a patent on something incredibly simple like Rumble, which is described in patents probably incredibly broadly and simplistically. Although, in fairness, Rumble almost certainly has prior art, as it were, as a concept. Like, things have been rumbling for decades. You could go back to the Tickler as a device that was installed under the seats of movies back in the 60s or 70s, I believe. That was a device. You certainly could go back to the 1920s and 30s when they were making massagers, vibrators for hysteria and for women. Made up diagnosis of hysteria. So yeah, something vibrating in general, intentionally, has existed for such a long time that the idea of Rumble should not have a patent on it. And I personally do not care how complicated or unique your rumbling technology may be. None of it deserves a patent because none of it is specifically that complicated that it needs to be protected as an idea. Nintendo's HD Rumble as a concept, they talked about that so much, but I never felt it in a game where it felt like it was actually particularly good or worthwhile. And even that HD Rumble concept and technology doesn't really deserve a patent. As highlighted by The Verge, Immersion claims that Valve has infringed the haptic tech patents, of which there are many, with the Steam Deck and Valve Index, which incorporated Rumble technology and support titles with haptic feedback features. Specifically, the company claims that Valve has been capitalizing on immersion's innovation and success by selling and otherwise monetizing video game systems, controllers, games, and other applications that infringe on immersion's patents. It also suggests the presence of haptic tech in both the Steam Deck and the Valve Index provides users with a richer and more immersive experience. I can't argue against that. Certainly, I think Rumble does, by a very small percentage, maybe 1%, give you a richer and more immersive experience. But it is such a unnecessary thing that a lot of games you could play and never have the Rumble on and never know. Very often I'll play a 60-hour game and there will be one point where the Rumble goes crazy and I'll go, oh, there's my controller rumbling. But almost certainly the game has been rumbling the whole time, but it's usually so subtle. You'll press A to jump and you'll feel just the tiniest of a fraction of a rumble that you just don't think of it. It was definitely a gimmick when it was first released, but now it's just very commonplace. As much as getting haptic feedback in the real world is very commonplace, that you touch something and it gives you a physical sensation of it being there. You don't think about it. Immersion is seeking damages, royalties, and an injunction that would prevent Valve from deploying, operating, maintaining, testing, or using the accused handheld instrumentalities and the accused VR instrumentalities. Steam Index. This isn't the first time Immersion has taken aim at a major manufacturer, with the company having previously sued Sony, Microsoft, Google, Apple. All of those companies settled with Immersion, which creates this terrible patent troll situation where Steam very well might also settle with Immersion. Although it is possible that all four of these companies settled with Immersion and paid them nothing and said, look, we're going to sue your pants off and nullivate your patents if you don't settle with us now. Settlement could very easily be suggested by Immersion to prevent them losing a lawsuit. But it does create this bad precedent, and it does highlight why big business has this massive amount of power, whereas a small business cannot compete. Because if I wanted to make a new Steam Deck personally myself, I probably couldn't afford to fight Immersion or even really settle with them in doing research. Whereas Sony, Microsoft, Google, and Apple can all say, this is a minor annoyance, let's just get rid of it. Although Nintendo hasn't been sued by the licensor, the Japanese company did sign an agreement with Immersion to bring its tech to the Switch. So Nintendo also doing business with them, which really validates a patent that really shouldn't be valid. So you really would have to cross your fingers and hope Valve, being run differently, that you get Gabe Newell, particularly if he has any real say, which he probably doesn't, coming up here and saying, no, we're going to actually fight this and we're going to nullivate these patents for everybody involved. The whole patent system at this point is fundamentally broken. It doesn't protect much of anybody other than big companies and big patent trolls that can sue big companies. Meanwhile, it squeezes out any competition whatsoever. Yeah. At a certain point, if they had to make a Steam Deck without Rumble, probably wouldn't be that big of a deal. I suppose it is also worth mentioning that the video they just came out with for the Steam Deck is right after the Asus RG Ally, I think was what it was called, was released. So perhaps they are seeing that as direct competition. That being said, the Asus Windows 11 portable Steam Deck competitor type device really didn't set anybody's pants on fire as far as being interested in it. It didn't review well and had incredibly poor battery life as one of the major problems, and just not really great performance for its battery life. Valve is also tweaking how it reports Steam traffic to protect player privacy. The company has said privacy first approach means devs will need to accept some trade-offs. So Valve is introducing new Steamworks tools that will affect how traffic data is presented to game developers in Steam. The company says the new tools have been built with player privacy in mind and noted an approach that means trade-offs have been made that will limit how specific some reporting can be. This possibly will change how the SteamDB works as a website. In most cases, it simply means that any traffic sources that are below a threshold of volume will get reported as other. We intentionally don't collect or store demographic information about users such as age, gender, or race. Interesting. I guess they probably don't collect age, even though they ask your age all the time when you go to an adult store or when you're logged in. I don't know if there really is an age or a birth date even there. Maybe Steam has your age, but they don't share it. Some of the most notable tweaks include updates from Steam's UTM system, which helps developers measure the effectiveness of their marketing campaigns. I don't even know what UTM stands for. When players have followed a UTM link from a website and then happen to their desktop client to complete a transaction, this conversion data will be reported in aggregate without disclosing any further personal information. Which, yeah, in general, this seems to imply to me that before, when somebody clicked on a link and purchased a Steam game, that was you were getting a lot more data, but now they are restricting that somewhat. The ESA is back at it again with trying to promote video games, which is their job as a lobbyist group. Although I imagine they're not having the most amount of success at the moment, as far as just, I doubt the Biden administration run by Biden cares too much about video games or to promote video games, and I doubt anybody else in Congress or Senate or House of Representatives cares too much about video games at the moment, which might be the best case scenario, frankly. Just keep government out of the business of censoring video games, and that's the best case you can expect. I doubt video game companies would ever start to get major charters or incentives or tax rebates or anything like that. Although in this case, this is yet another example of people apparently not understanding how Twitter works now. Maybe Twitter changed how it worked, and that they have made these super long tweet threads. Although it is, I guess, somewhat more acceptable in this case that the ESA is going on a long tweet thread, because noticeably the ESA did not pay for a blue check mark or a gold corporate check mark, so they don't have the feature to do longer tweets. Although inherently Twitter as a whole system is broken if the only way you can finance it is by forcing people to break tweets up into these long chains, which also that breaks the original concept, which has long since been broken, of Twitter, in that you were supposed to be putting out short, concise ideas, not long tweets. Then finally, this is another story I wanted to mention, because it, as much as everybody rightfully so hates NFTs, it, at least in this case, seems like there's something you could actually sell in this, because they've licensed a series of Assassin's Creed NFTs that come that let users order physical versions of the NFTs, which seems like this is probably an epoxy based glass cube or plastic cube with a little figurine on the inside and a little platform. It is possible that this is actually, let's see if we can get a bigger picture. There you go. It's possible that this could have been done with lasers, so that there wasn't an actual piece of plastic on the inside as much as there was a just image 3D lasered into it. But no, I think this actually is just a piece of plastic looking at it. So it's a little plastic doll, a little plastic toy that you can't handle outside of the cube and you can't pose or play with. It does seem like it comes with a little QR code for the NFT things, thus the background art. You see there's apparently a numbering system here of like 500 that they're going to sell, which inherently that makes you assume that there will be 500 physical versions made too. There's always been this weirdness, certainly around action figures from video games, and action figures in general is just like, because kids that are playing with action figures are probably a little bit younger than video gamers, and as video games become more and more commonplace, for younger kids, action figures in general and that kind of pretend play becomes less and less common. So then you get away from the idea of action figures into more just figurines and displays that you put on a shelf and look at every now and then, and it makes the shelf look pretty but doesn't have any other value at all. At that point, putting it in an epoxy cube maybe gives you a consistent visual style, but it really compromises it more than anything else. I think you would be better off having a bigger, better physical statue and selling the statue at a higher price with an NFT, and have even more of the focus be around the idea of collecting the figurines and posing them wherever you want next to other figurines. If you are a figurine collector, putting one cube next to another cube next to another cube is going to be very artistically limiting as far as how you display it on the shelf, and it's just not going to be that interesting. If you wanted this character, for instance, to be at like a 5-degree angle looking at this other character, well, the two cubes didn't collide, so the cube is a big problem there. But at least it's something physical. That being said, it's still around the nonsense of NFTs. I think Nintendo's idea has been a lot better of an idea in that these you have Nintendo Amigo things that have the NFC tags built into the base, and they are figurines that you can actually pose and put on your shelf in any way you want. And in a lot of ways, they're not quite action figures because I don't think they're posable, or really that playable, but they definitely make a lot more sense. Ubisoft is also in the problem in that they are only really able to make things around Assassin's Creed and very little other games. Like there are a few other games you maybe could make some figurines around, but not that many. If you do Beyond Good and Evil, that just creates problems, and you remind people that Beyond Good and Evil is stuck in development hell. If you do like Mirror's Edge, then you just remind people that Mirror's Edge is not getting another game, not likely to get another game. And there's not really any other games I can even think of from Ubisoft to work around that. Okay, so let's go through the rest of the news, since those were the big news stories that caught my eye. Maybe I shouldn't bother to make big news stories, because that is basically another hour of talking in more depth. No, I think that's probably the right way. If you think about a regular TV news show, you would have your breaking news, your top news at the beginning, things people are really interested in. Then you would have the more generic news at later on, and maybe in regular news you would have a weather section at the end or near the end to keep people watching. Let's see. The PlayStation-backed Deviation Games has been hit with layoffs. The studio is currently working on an original IP that would be published by Sony. We may have talked about this. Yeah, we did. It's getting dangerously close to the point where I'm thinking PlayStation has laid off multiple people at multiple companies. Apparently, one of Call of Duty's most iconic maps was originally released by accident. Shipment was meant to be removed before Call of Duty 4 Warfare's release. I don't know why it would be removed. It was, I guess, supposed to be a non-online map. That definitely sounds like more of a story that's possibly true, but also is possibly just revisionist memories to get some news press when there's really not anything you could do around knowing that information. If it was released on accident and became popular enough to stay around and they didn't remove it or take it back, then you just kind of go, whoops, well, that's out there now, let's just ignore it. Layers of Fear is coming out on June 15th if we didn't have a date. Super Mario Bros. Movie is now Mexico's highest grossing film of all time, overtaking Spider-Man No Way Home. That being said, I don't know how much money you're really getting by putting the movies in Mexico. Overall, worldwide, it's gotten 1.2 billion. Mexico, it got 82.4 million. UK, it got 63.2 million. Japan, 59 million. France. So, yeah, I guess that does probably tell you something, that Mexico's market, in this case, made more money than Japan did for this week. Which, yeah, it probably had already been out for a week before then, or even a couple weeks before that in Japan and the UK. So it's launching in Mexico at a delayed spot. Notably, the United States is not listed here, so it's either not in theaters in the United States at all anymore, or they've intentionally eliminated the United States, which I would have to assume would make more money than 82.4 million. And it definitely does make sense to me that the Mario movie in particular would be a movie that is heavily watched in the first week that it comes out, and then there's not a lot of desire to go back and watch it again the second week. That being said, I don't think kids' movies these days have to be that replayable. Like, you really don't need to watch any kind of kids movie over and over again unless the kid is just obsessed with it, and that's not that common these days. Whereas I think it was fairly common to watch, say, like The Lion King when I was a kid multiple times. Like every 2 or 3 years you would see The Lion King again. Either somebody in school, some substitute teacher would come in and play it or something like that. So it would be around, or it would be on TV. Not that I really like The Lion King. Personally, it's a fine movie. It's just not one I would have wanted to watch multiple times. The Xbox version of Stray has been rated by the ESRB. I would have sworn Stray was already on the Xbox, but I guess not. So Stray is coming to Xbox, no longer being kind of a Sony exclusive. I don't think Stray came to the Switch. Yeah, it was originally released for the PS4, PS5, and PC in July of 2022. We already talked about the Ubisoft NFT things. Horizon Forbidden West musician says she's getting hateful abuse from the players. Julie Elvin's vocals featured in a DLC plot point, which is angering certain people. This once again feels like yet another story that is being put out there either by mainstream video game journalists to highlight hate that I think a lot of games probably get. And I think most game companies say, hey, to everybody that works for us, you may get hate on Twitter. Those are trolls. Don't worry about it. Don't respond to it. We have a plan to ignore it and let it go away, which is the best plan possible. But that definitely doesn't seem like that's the plan that's been implemented for Horizon Forbidden West. They seem to love to promote and highlight that their fandom, people who played the game and purchased the game, people that gave them money, are unhappy with the product and are abusive and mean. It really is this persecution complex that they love to make public. This is perhaps another problem with Twitter, and arguably there's room for a lot of improvement there. But yeah, I have seen basically no news outside of Video Games Chronicle talking about people being upset around this. Like, Gamatsu hasn't talked about it, and even GameDeveloper.com I don't think has talked about it. So it really feels like this is Video Games Chronicle just pushing the narrative more than anything else. Yes, some people are probably upset, and rightfully, I think they probably are upset that you would have Alloy, who in 2 games and at least 2 pieces of DLC has been written in such a way that she felt like she was one type of character, to then very abruptly give a prompt to make her romance another female character and reveal she was a lesbian all along, seems just like bad writing and rug pulling. Whereas if the entirety of the DLC had been working its way up to the idea of her realizing she was a lesbian, and if that had been a major plot point, and if that had been hinted at the beginning of the game, I don't think very many people would have been upset with the revelation of her kissing this character or whatever. I don't think there's a large majority of gamers out there that are anti-lesbian relationships. The problem is just bad writing and just bad implementation. So yeah, this definitely feels a lot more like The Boy Who Cried Wolf than a real story. So I'll leave it at that. Like, obviously there probably are some trolls out there, and some people that are legitimately upset. I don't know how many people there are. It's an insignificant amount. If anything, Sony should be a lot more upset around just Horizon as potentially trying to be a new Uncharted or a new AAA game series that stands on its own without any comparisons, has not managed to maintain its fandom in its sequel and its DLC. The second game was considerably less, people were considerably less excited around Horizon Forbidden West compared to the first Horizon game. And the reviews around the sequel were not particularly amazing. So one can only hope that the third game was better, but I really have very little faith that the third Horizon game would be better, because even before the game starts pre-development and pre-production, I feel like there's this persecution complex that is just being allowed to grow amongst people working on the game, to the point where they resent their own fans and would resent working on the project. It would be better, honestly, if Sony, I don't know if Sony owns the company or not, but it'd be better if Horizon was taken away from the current team and handed to a different team completely, and let somebody else do something different with it, like new everything, just full on reboot, full on concept. Get rid of Alloy. She's played her role probably as well as she could, and just start in that universe with a new character somewhere completely different, potentially on the other side of the world even, might work. Moving on, Battlefield's mobile lead says 2042's failure contributed to the mobile's cancellation and his studio's closure. Former Bungie co-founder Alex Seropin says it was one of a few reasons the game was scrapped. Which, okay. I mean, yeah. Undoubtedly, if a game fails, it is going to be one of a few reasons why a game would be scrapped or a company would be closed. That's pretty obvious. Moving on. Next, the new Xbox Game Pass titles for console, PC, and cloud have been announced. It includes FIFA 23, Planet of Lana, Railway Empire 2, Chicory: A Colorful Tale, and here's some games that were leaving in contrast. As far as Europa Universalis, Evil Genius 2, FIFA 2021, Floppy Nights, and Lawn Mowing Simulator. Sega suggests it could become the latest publisher to raise game prices to $70. The company is going to review prices of titles that they believe are commensurate with the price increases. The problem there is that the vast majority of Sega games are garbage and not really even worth $60. That being said, the Sonic Frontiers game that they're highlighting here probably is worth the AAA price of $60, or at least justifiable at that price. Although it is always worth pointing out that a large number of PC gamers would never pay $60 even for a AAA game. They would rather wait a couple years and get it on a Steam sale for at least half off, if not 75, 80, 95% off. And you really can't have the most amount of faith that a Sonic Frontiers 2 could be made quickly and come out and be good, and that they then at that point would charge $70 for a Sonic Frontiers. Noticeably too, no company is saying, hey, we're going to raise the price to $70, but we're going to get rid of microtransactions or DLC. It does kind of feel like that we're seeing a little bit less of DLC. No more real talk of season passes and 4, 5, 6 pieces of DLC in those season passes for a lot of games, which that is, I guess, a good thing. If people sold it that way and said, hey, we're selling the full game at $70 and then we're not releasing DLC, that would be great. But it definitely seems like it's more of a case where they're selling a full game at $70, or most of a full game at $70, and then they are selling at least one piece of DLC after that. And there might be like developmental reasons why you would want games to have one piece of DLC released, because that would be like the code that they couldn't get out. But those probably should just be free updates. They should probably just get to the point where it's like you pay $70 for a game, and if we finish some code for some stuff that we left on the cutting room floor, we'll put that out as a free piece of DLC or a free update in the game. And they probably should just call it an update and not DLC, because DLC has a toxic feeling around it now. But yeah, there's no promises of that at all. We're almost certainly going to have $70 games that have season passes for another $30 to get it up to $100. After the Sonic movie success, Sega says it could adopt other IPs to the big screen. Quote, we would like to take on challenges outside of the Sonic IP should the opportunities arise. This is almost certainly all being said during a Q&A section or a shareholders meeting. So what they're responding and saying really is to shareholders, and it probably has less to do with what they really are planning on to do as you would think. Once again, you get into the weird situation though, as far as Sega IPs. What are they really talking about? Are they talking about Crazy Taxi? Do they own the IP to Jet Set Radio? I really would have a hard time trying to figure out what other things Sega owns. Like, they may own like Vector Man or Echo the Dolphin, any of those really old Sega Genesis Master System games that were first party titles. They may technically own the rights to those games, but there really wouldn't be a lot of reason to turn those into movies. It would be kind of crazy. I don't think Sega really even has a kid-friendly second series. Like, Nintendo has Zelda or as their second tier kind of still kid-friendly series. Sega, I don't think, has anything like that. Ubisoft plans to increase the number of Assassin's Creed developers by 40%. The company has at least 6 new entries in the long-running series in development. Wow. Talk about just tripling down on Assassin's Creed. That being said, Assassin's Creed now is very different from what it was, so that they're making RPG games with a lot of grind and calling it Assassin's Creed versus parkour platforming games that Assassin's Creed was originally. Ubisoft has added X Defiant to its 23-24 lineup. The free-to-play shooter's recent beta attracted over 1 million players. Okay. Assassin's Creed Mirage will be released in October, it's been claimed. After reportedly being delayed at least twice, the game is officially coming this year. Is there anything even unique about Assassin's Creed Mirage? No. Now, if they were scaling up and then they were remaking the original games, I wouldn't hate that idea terribly. But I don't know what they really need to remake in the original games. Just the same level layouts. It probably should be a new characters and a new story. Like, there's nothing terrible around the story of the first Assassin's Creed games, but there really isn't a lot of reason to have Altair show back up. And Ezio's story is decent enough, but there's not really a reason to remake and redo that also. And if they were going to remake them, there is the high danger that remaking Assassin's Creed 1 or 2 and 3 and 4 would all just change them into this new RPG style, which maybe that makes sense to fans of the RPG style, but that effectively destroys what it is, what Assassin's Creed was previously known as. May's PlayStation Plus game catalog and classic titles are now available. Let's see. Fairly long list here of games that I think they had already announced and we'd already covered, but you can check this out on Video Games Chronicles if you're interested. We already talked about Nintendo delisting Pac-Man 99. Disney Speedstorm has nerfed this guy after implying it wouldn't. Mike has been weakened while Sully has been improved. There was kind of a crazy problem there in that he was literally teleporting, and he's teleporting the number 1 position person backwards and teleporting himself almost certainly to the number 1 position. And so they have nerfed it where you spawn this door and now it's only 1 door instead of 2. Charged activations still spawns 2 doors. The distance players are teleported has been reduced by 10%, and the door disappears in 10 seconds now, down from 20 seconds. So yeah, that's definitely a nerf. It still doesn't get to the heart of the idea that teleporting yourself forward instead of just getting a boost is not really acceptable in a racing game, and teleporting someone else backwards is totally unacceptable. You could have slowed them down instead, but just having somebody appear where they once were or not is not really acceptable in a racing game. Let's see. Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, that's I guess going to take me a while to get that shortened title, is only the 60th game in 30 years to get both a Famitsu 40 and an Edge 10. I think personally this puts far too much value on Edge, whatever that is. I don't even know what that is, but yeah, Famitsu 40 to get a perfect score from Famitsu I know is a big deal, because you have 4 people on a scale of 0 to 10, all having to give it 10 to get a 40. These are Japanese reviewers who are going to be particularly much more critical, whereas the UK magazine Edge giving it a 10 doesn't really mean anything to me at all. And we know Video Games Chronicle is a UK based website, so they very possibly are overemphasizing. Boy, does that text look small on my preview window. They are potentially overemphasizing here the UK Edge. Yeah, why is that text so small? Feels like at some point here I may have zoomed out. But noticeably, it doesn't seem like there's much I can do here to increase the size either. Okay, well, whatever. I'll leave it at that. Feels like the font size should be bigger, but I'll have to figure out if there's a way to do that. Saudi Arabia has reportedly increased its stake in the EA. There was this story, and it doesn't have anything to do with video games, around the US seizing assets from Russian oligarchs, and then a discussion on how Putin himself on paper doesn't actually have that much money, and that he makes the Russian oligarchs hold all the money for him, and then when he wants to do some kind of government action, he forces the oligarchs to patriotically fund those kinds of government actions. Or when he wants to use money, I'm sure he forces the oligarchs to give him money. And if the oligarchs say, hey, we're not going to give you money, well, then they just get thrown out a window. Or there have been instances in which their assets have just been seized by the US government, the Russian government, and then end up in Putin's hands anyways. I can't help but think, and maybe this is a little tinfoil hat, that the Saudi Arabian Public Interest Fund, in a lot of ways, is a way in which the Crown Royal Prince and just the Saudi Arabian political leaders are putting money that is effectively their own money into this public interest fund to kind of launder it, and then that money is getting further laundered by owning video game companies. And so inherently there's always been this fear that the public interest fund was trying to buy influence by owning parts of video games, but maybe they're just straight up trying to launder money. And at some point, if Saudi Arabia got in trouble with like the United States or some other company, maybe the United States or some other country would seize Saudi Arabia's investment in video game companies. And so at some point 9% of EA might be seized by the United States, and then all of a sudden the United States owns 9% of EA. Maybe intentionally, like maybe Saudi Arabia is working with a country like the United States and working to potentially allow a government to control a business that they otherwise would not control. That would be the tinfoil hat theory. On top of another tinfoil hat is that Saudi Arabia is secretly in cahoots with, say, the United States to buy significant portions of the EA and other video game companies, and then in some kind of backroom deal, the United States seizes that interest on those companies, and then all of a sudden the United States owns a bunch of video game companies, and the United States all of a sudden is putting out censorship laws. Yeah, that definitely is a tinfoil hat on top of a tinfoil hat conspiracy. But yeah, there is almost this danger. Well, it's not almost. There is definitely a danger in allowing a company to be publicly owned, in the fact that anybody basically could have an investment in a company, and maybe you don't want any random person to have an investment in a company. Maybe there's some extra problems that people don't really think about there. If I owned a taco truck and then it somehow was publicly owned and I sold shares of it, and then it turned out that 10% of that taco truck was owned by Putin or was owned by a gang or like a drug dealers or something like that. Like, that's big problems, certainly. That's not something you want when you're just trying to run a taco truck. But yeah, I guess I really don't have too much substantive to say there. This is a continued process, obviously. And at a certain point, we kind of don't care about EA that much, but it would kind of suck too if EA went away completely, because there are a lot of games that EA has the licenses to, even though they're doing nothing with it. It would be actually very surprisingly good, though, if all of a sudden the Saudi Arabian Public Interest Fund owned a voting share, controlling share. They already have a voting share, but they owned enough shares to all of a sudden have somebody on the board telling them to make more games, instead of EA just sitting around making profit off of its sports games. Tears of the Kingdom breaks Nintendo's records with 10 million sales in 3 days. So, ton of hype. What's really surprising about this, although not, I mean, it is kids, so it should have been expected, is just how hyped kids were for this game compared to how little advertising Nintendo really had to do. Like, did anybody see commercials for this? Were there ads on YouTube that I just didn't see because I'm blocking them? Or I'm not the target audience? Like, I guess maybe there were some ads around Tears of the Kingdom, but I bet there weren't. I bet it was just word of mouth hype. YouTubers hyping it up, and friends of kids hyping it up to each other. Sony's PlayStation Showcase returns next Wednesday. It will feature a wealth of new games and new IPs that are headed to the PS5 and the PSVR 2. It'll be interesting to see what they announce. Anything that's announced here, you have to assume is coming around Christmas or later. And so if very little is announced here, then you kind of have a general idea that nothing's coming out this Christmas for the PlayStation, although that may not hurt hardware sales of the PlayStation 5 that much if it's actually available around Christmas. In contrast, if they announce a bunch of stuff and it's such a large amount that it feels like it's spaced out for, say, the next 12 months, then that would just be a very good lineup for PlayStation, which they definitely could benefit from that. Star Wars Jedi Survivor topped the US software sales in April, even though it was incredibly buggy on PC. Lots and lots of people bought it. Although, in fairness, when you look at the new games, Dead Island 2 made the 2nd place, and PGA Tour made 7th place. Mega Man Battle Network Collection, being a collection of old games, made 8th. Microsoft Minecraft Legends didn't even make the top 10. So that's a massive failure. If anything, I think Minecraft Legends needs an apology as much as Redfall needs an apology. Which, notably, Redfall, not even listed here. Final Fantasy bundle. making 14 space. Advanced Wars 1+2 Reboot Camp doing particularly poorly in 15 space, probably because of the delays in part. Latest patch we talked about. Apparently, Lego 2K Drive may delete your progress if you play offline and reconnect. So that sounds like a cloud syncing rollback issue. It's probably not intentional. I doubt it's some kind of anti-cheat thing or anything like that. And definitely that's not the big reason to avoid Lego 2K Drive. The big reason to avoid Lego 2K Drive is that it seems to me like it's got a lot of microtransactions in it. And I've yet to see any reviews or anybody talking about it as if it was an actually good game for a Lego game or just good game in general. We already talked about Telltale's The Expanse. Let's see. Roll Coley to host a Warhammer Skulls reveal stream next week. The presentation will feature world premieres and more according to Games Workshop. Does any of this have to do with video games though, or is this just an announcement of Warhammer tabletop things? Not sure. The new Mortal Kombat game will be revealed on Thursday, so tomorrow, I guess. So, good thing we didn't have to wait because this clock hint particularly is not that exciting as far as video game. I am somewhat excited though to see what they really offer in or what they're going to even promise in a Mortal Kombat reboot. BlizzCon is returning in November. We already talked about. Diablo's gameplay launch trailer welcomes players to hell. The game will be released in early June. Let's see. So that brings us to our Gematsu articles. Let's burn through these kind of fast. Amazon Game announces the Lord of the Rings MMO for console and PC developed by New World Studios. We had already been told that. It's still very questionable as to what kind of MMO you can make around Lord of the Rings. And honestly, we may never get an answer because this is Amazon Games, and unless they really turn it around, they've yet to produce major successes or any real games. We already talked about Stray coming to Xbox Series and Xbox One. A game called Tiny Thor launches for PC June 5th and then later this summer for Switch. Let's see that on Steam. Seems like it's a platforming game with a different visual theme, which definitely you could use more of that. This definitely feels kind of like a Kid Icarus game in particular, in the sense that Kid Icarus visually looked different than a lot of the other Nintendo games at the time. The Legend of Nayuta Boundless Trails launches September 19th in North America and September 22nd in Europe. What kind of game is it? It's PlayStation 4 and PC. It's a JRPG. Do we really have time to look at trailers? Not really. You've got kind of an anime intro, and then the actual game looks more pixely. In actual gameplay, the visuals look fine, but there really needs to be better separation in the advertising. Like, these intro animation scenes are frankly just straight up false advertising in a lot of games compared to what you're actually seeing for the vast majority of your gameplay time. Let's see. Game Pass adds Eastern Exorcist, Ghost Lore, Massive Chalice, and more in late May. There's a list here on Gamatsu if you want to check that out. Arc Raiders genre changed to a PvE extraction shooter, no longer being a cooperative shooter. I don't know what player versus player event means versus player. Seems like they are just getting ridiculous with the acronyms or initialisms. Final Fantasy XVI is Game Informer's issue cover story, which really isn't news that much, other than I guess Game Informer maybe still somewhat valuable. Shantae #1 for the PS5 and PS4 launches June 2nd. Is the original Shantae remake on PC, or are PC players going to have to wait, or are they never going to get Shantae #1? If I recall correctly, and I could be totally wrong about this, I don't think Shantae #1 has been released on PC. That being said, the original Shantae is basically like a Game Boy game. So remaking it is going to be a weird experience in the first place. I already talked about Pac-Man 99 going to be delisted on October 8th, although they may have not mentioned the date in the Video Games Chronicle article. Famitsu review scores issue 1798, giving Tears of the Kingdom a 10, 10, 10, and 10 for 40, and then Kazuna AI Touch the Beast a very low 27 out of 40, Puzzle Bobble Everywhere 31 out of 40, which is about average, Ruby Arrow fell a 27 out of 40, low again. Ruby as a series never seems like it's going to succeed, and if anything they probably should just stop trying until they can make something great. That's probably also true for the Ruby anime. And then Transport Fever got a 30 out of 40. Tears of the Kingdom is the 28th game ever and the 5th Legend of Zelda game to receive a perfect score. So there's been 5 others. And that was something that was very noticeable, is that if you look at the top 8 games that they were showing on one article that had received a perfect 40 from Famitsu, 5 of them are Zelda games. Which, inherently, you would think, if that's what Japanese people like, then why are there so many JRPGs that are so far off from just the... I guess the general question there is, why are there so many Japanese role-playing games and not as many Japanese adventure games? Because Zelda games are adventure games. They're not role-playing. They don't have that grind. They don't have big teams that you build up. There's not evolution of your characters or anything like that. There's no Pokemon or side collectible characters. Zelda game effectively is always an adventure where you play as Link, you get a bunch of weapons, usually you get the Master Sword at near the end, and then you defeat a boss, and you go through usually a bunch of temples, with the exception of Breath of the Wild. But in a role-playing game, you play as one character, and then you very quickly grow up a team, and then you have to grind for a long time before you can get out of a starting area in most JRPGs. Your characters have a ton of stats. They get items, but none of the items are important, and they break and they can be sold. It's just incredibly more overcomplicated compared to a Zelda adventure. So why do they keep making JRPGs when Zeldas are better received? Adventure games, simpler games are better received. Is it just that Final Fantasy is being copied so much? Probably. But even at that, I would have to double check. When you're talking like Final Fantasy 1, 2, and 3, did those games sell better in Japan than the Legend of Zelda on the NES, or Zelda 2 probably sold pretty poorly, but Zelda 2 also is an RPG game. And like, obviously consistently over decades you've had better consumer reception around the Zelda series compared to any other JRPG series over the same time period. Uh, and yeah, I feel like the Japanese people are just missing a beat here. There should be more adventure games. Just straight up Zelda ripoffs. For every JRPG, take half of those and turn them into Zelda adventure games. Get away from the RPG elements and the grind. Moving on, Sky Children of the Light is coming to PC. It's currently already available for the PS4, Switch, iOS, and Android. This game is slowly coming to everything, and this game has been multiple times. I've tried it at least 2 times and not gotten past the beginning because it is this weird MMO where people play in the same instance as you. So let's see, I think I saw it here. You kind of start the game in this temple and you have to light a bunch of candles, is what I think you do. So that's about the point. There's a 5-10 minute intro section before that where you are in your own private instance. But once you get to that point, that's when people in the MMO start to spawn and magically appear. And that's the point where inevitably somebody has lit the candles and run out the door that they opened by lighting the candles and finished the gameplay content for me and not allowed me to play, because there's always going to be somebody faster. So if there's a single player mode on this, maybe I would give this a chance. That being said, I think I've twice gotten this game for free, and so if this was actual money, that would also be a hard sell. But yeah, definitely worth yet another YouTube short. Little Friends Puppy Island launches June 27th, which any game where you get to play with dogs can't be that terrible as a concept. Visuals here look kind of good. There's not a ton here, it looks like, to do though. It looks like they're just going to do very simplistic normal stuff with dogs. If anything, whether it with puppies or Pokemon or cats or anything else, it feels like there should be a gameplay section that's like this, where you just take care of dogs and watch them sleep and run around and play. And then there should be perhaps a bigger adventure game behind that, even if it is just a running around larger areas finding bones type gameplay. Something more than just a small backyard environment, which is what that felt like. Moving on, Jagged Alliance 3 launches July 14th for Steam. I feel like I've heard of the Jagged Alliance series, but yeah, haven't really touched upon it much. It's this turn-based tactics top-down game series that probably hasn't gotten enough coverage or fanfare. Zelda Tears of the Kingdom sales top 10 million in the first 3 days. Here's possibly a spoiler. You have a big box-like creature. Nocturnal launches June 7th, priced at $19.99 on consoles and $16.99 on PC. That's quite the discount for a launch price. I wonder why. Overpass 2 has been announced for the PS5, Xbox Series, and PC, due out October 19th. I assume this is a racing game with dune buggies. Which, yeah, I could see there being a slightly different experience racing in dune buggies compared to, say, racing in Formula 1 cars versus street cars, which feels very similar in a lot of video games, or trying to compare video games to each other. A stylish action strategy game called the Teenage Demon Slayer Society has been announced for PC. Okay. We'll give that a chance. I feel like I didn't open a link to that racing game, so I skipped that. Yeah. Guess what I could do though is, let's see, go to recently closed. Let's see. History. Here. Can't read any of this from this distance. Not recent history. Yeah. Okay. So it doesn't have a Steam link. That's why I didn't open it. Okay. That was a waste of time then. PlayStation Showcase for 2023 has been set for May 24th. We already talked about that. Save Me, Mr. Tako's spiritual successor is an action RPG called Tako no Himitsu, The Ocean of Secrets. It has been announced for PC. Kickstarter campaign coming soon. It's weird to not launch a Kickstarter campaign at the same time you would launch a listing page on PC. I don't know if I ever had any real interest in Save Me, Mr. Tako as a spiritual successor. Definitely feels like a Game Boy game. And they don't seem like they are pointing towards Save Me, Mr. Tako. Tako being the Japanese word for octopus. Let's see. As far as this game. Yeah, I think it's important to point out here on Steam. This came out May 5th, 2021. It's 90% positive, but it has only 20 user reviews, and it's $14.99, which is probably the big reason for it. It is definitely more of a Game Boy game, whereas the previous game is the sequel, spiritual successor, is a Game Boy Color game. This game also is seemingly only made by this Christoph Galashi, where this new sequel, spiritual successor, is being developed and published by Dinios. Yeah, and once you start to get into a Game Boy Color feeling game, it feels more reasonable. Also, let's check out this sale while we're getting distracted. It's French Direct. Discover the best upcoming French-speaking games. My ad blocking is probably changing how this looks on Steam, but noticeably white background instead of black background. We have I recognize this game as coming soon, but a lot of these I don't recognize as having seen at all. I didn't feel like there was a ton of games that were French speaking and I wasn't seeing them. I don't think I ever programmed anything like that. I only programmed it to exclude games that were exclusively Chinese language. Netflix is doing a live action Asterix and Obelix show coming out in a week, which probably has nothing to do with video games coming out. So, yeah, I guess I'd have to assume it's possible to make game pages that say they're coming soon and not end up having me see it somehow. Unless we get to the new games and I start to see every single one of these that's labeled as coming soon, which is a possibility. It is very possible that we just have a ton of new games to look at because of this event exclusively. We already talked about Telltale The Expanse. Midlife simulator RPG called Mirthwood has been announced for PC. You farm, fight, and forage in friendship. So I guess that would mean it's a 4F game instead of a 4X game, which is an interesting concept. Looking here though, it's really not catching my attention too much, as it really just feels like yet another one of these Stardew Valley games with just a different visual around it, which I do applaud the different visuals. That's about all I can applaud. The Smurfs 2, The Prisoner of the Green Stone, has been announced for PS4, PS5, Xbox Series, Xbox One, Switch, and PC. Which, yeah. I'm not 100% sure that the previous Smurf games of the past few years have been great, but I think they've been good enough to continue down this way. And it's nice to see the Smurfs just existing at all, whereas it very easily could have been a forgotten franchise, which Warner Brothers is particularly bad about that, as far as just a lot of crazy racist type Warner Brothers Hanna-Barbera characters that could have video games being made around them, or even new cartoons made around them. Moving on, the Otome visual novel Finally in Love Again is coming to Switch on May 25th. Otome meaning young maiden, just in case you're not certain about that. So hunky anime boy type characters with a female protagonist in romance situations usually. A card game called Asterix and Obelix Heroes has been announced for PC and consoles, including the Switch, due out in September. This is from Nacon, so I wonder if this is going to straight up try to be a Marvel Snap competitor, but noticeably they're not announcing it to be playable on any kind of mobile things. And it says it's going to have RPG elements, which probably means it's not going to be a player versus player experience. And so it may very well just be kind of a weird single player experience with card games. The game Daydream Forgotten Sorrow has been delayed for PC to June 14th, no longer coming out May 24th. Which, do games deserve a YouTube short for being delayed? Not really, but I will say I don't think I've made a YouTube short around this anytime recently. This definitely feels like Daydream is from the same makers of a Nightmare game called, and that this is almost a contrast to a game called Nightmare. But that doesn't seem to be really the case. Well, inevitably there is a game that looks a lot like this. Little Nightmares, I believe, is the name of it. So it definitely seems heavily inspired, if not straight up ripping off that concept and that idea, which is fine. Platforming in a horror experience is not that unique. The PC Gaming Show 2023 is going to feature 16 new game announcements, and a total of 55 games will be present, which would be more than one for every week of the next 12 months. That being said, who's to say all these games will be released in the next 12 months? 16 new games would be one for every month, plus a few extra. And again, that would be an assumption that they would each be released one per month, which they probably wouldn't, and that they're all coming out in the next 12 months. Confirmed appearances include Baldur's Gate 3, Dune Awakening, Frostpunk 2, PAX Die, and a brand new game from Clay Entertainment. An open world simulator RPG called Project May by Panthea Games has been announced. A new title set in the My Time universe. So, what kind of game is that? It kind of just looks like a generic kind of fantasy Stardew Valley type game. Definitely am not seeing anything that looks amazing. If this was on mobile phones, then I guess the graphics maybe look a little bit better than average. But that's pretty much all I could say. Yeah, it is a smartphone game. Different kind of art style with older looking characters. Yeah, nothing amazing there, but it looks a little different and a little bit better for a smartphone game. Unfortunately, the problem here is nobody's going to come out with even more powerful smartphones in probably the next 2 or 3 years. So, if we get better smartphones, it's going to be for battery life. It's not going to be that it has ray tracing graphics or higher resolutions or better CPUs for gaming. So, we may get a slight bump up in quality as far as mobile games, but really we have to wait for a lot of people to replace their old phones with things that could actually handle more modern second generation or the next generation of video games on mobile phones, and that may take a very long time. And as far as gaming phones, I just don't think we're going to see major improvements or a lot of those being sold in the first place. Really, they're more interested in selling you folding screens than they are a gaming cell phone. Of course, the Steam Deck might change that if we got to the point where everybody's just carrying around Steam Decks and like Bluetooth AirPods to make phone calls. But Steam Decks are too big, really, to carry around day to day just to make a phone call. If anything, maybe phones should get smaller and there should be some kind of wireless screen. Otherwise, BlizzCon 2023 has been set for November 3rd to the 4th. Alright, and then we've got some fall list cleanup. Here we have one called Farlight 84. It's very positive battle royale smash it all game. I don't know why this would have been on my fall list though, because I'm never going to play a battle royale player versus player game. Inevitably, I've probably put a lot of games like that just would never qualify as a video game critic. Far Gone. Do I really want to play something like this? Well, it's still early access since December of 2022, so it needs more time anyways. Faraday Protocol is much more my style as far as a puzzle game. It's very positive. It's out of early access. We can put that on the wish list. Far Cry 6. Guess it's mostly positive. 71%. But if anything, I want to actually leave this on the fall list. I'm very much questioning how many Far Cry games I'd really want to play. Fantavision. Although in all fairness, I probably should just put it on the wish list in case somebody wants to gift me a bunch of Far Cry games. And then I would have no excuse to not play them, other than just time. Fantasy Town Regional Manager. Is this early access? No. I'll put that on the wish list. Family Curse. A puzzle. Psychological horror game. Of course, the problem here is I'm putting all of these things on the wish list, and then A, I don't really have time to play all these games, and B, I just don't get around to buying them even. More and more, I'm just getting a Steam collection that would be great to hire an assistant to have somebody else also play the same games as part of a business. This family business game, I guess I'll give more time to, but it's probably nothing. Probably shouldn't be on the fall list. Fallen Knight. Looks like it's probably a Mega Man clone, but you can see it's not very well received. It's been out since 2021, so it's never going to get enough reviews anyways, so that can leave. And then Fall Girls here. Looks like an adult game. Let me double check here. May contain general sexual content. May is what it says. Alright, let me look at the screenshots just to make sure it's YouTube family friendly enough. Like, inevitably, you can see this is 61% positive and has way more reviews than you would think, being tagged as having sexual content when it really just has lewd content. It's a single player clone of Fall Guys, and at a certain level there must be some rewards with these anime girl images, but it really is just Fall Guys with asset flipped anime girls. Although, in fairness, these asset flipped anime girls don't look anywhere as bad as most of them do. But yeah, major problem certainly when you have an idea like Fall Guys and then you don't have online content to play with this. Plus, Fall Guys was really a flash in the pan concept. The name is smart, certainly. Fall Guys, turn it to Fall Girls, and then if you want to make it out of a lewd game, that's fine. Like, there is definitely an argument to take a game called Fall Guys and call it Fall Girls and just have strong, empowered females, not in bikinis, in the game. That doesn't happen very often, certainly. Fall Guys in general, their 3D models of characters are silly monster characters. So switching the silly monster characters to bikini clad characters is not a terrible thought either. So there's a lot of decent thoughts here, but it obviously should have been a full adult game with actual nudity, and possibly even just some more suggestive stuff in the environments, and you would have had to have made an actual game that worked, and even at that it very possibly would have failed just being single player. Next we have a game called Fall For You, which I guess I want to give a little bit more time to, but probably isn't going anywhere. And then that brings us to our GameDeveloper.com articles. Darkest Dungeon selling over 500,000 copies, we talked about. Blizzard has reworked Overwatch's 2-player versus event mode into seasonal story missions. Blizzard introduced More changes to Overwatch 2 as the hero shooter continues to embrace its live service mold. I feel like this article may be out of date because I was seeing basically no player versus event content at all being made. That they had just given up on that. So this article may be wrong or out of date and need updates, or maybe I'm wrong. It's very possible I'm wrong because I only really was reading the headlines. Suffice it to say, as somebody who doesn't play Overwatch 2, this sounds like Overwatch 2 is just heavily going to be its player versus player content, and very little focus is going to be on any other kind of content. Then we've talked about Pac-Man 99. Let's see. Riot's $100 million gender discrimination settlement has been granted final approval, and a shocking $80 million will be set aside for current and former Riot employees, with the rest covering legal fees and expenses, which legal fees and expenses being $20 million is ridiculous, but that is unfortunately the world we live in. I wouldn't have been surprised if the lawyers got 50 million out of 100 million, really. In this kind of lawsuit too, versus the class action suits that get you usually 50 cents or so, this probably is going to end up giving hundreds of thousands of dollars to individual people in the gender discrimination suits, and they have an arguable good right to that much money, because if this gender discrimination hurt their career, it's almost impossible to fix that with any amount of money. If they didn't get a promotion when they deserved a promotion, if they're older now, if they're not in the industry now, if they have less of a resume when they try to apply at a different company because of gender discrimination, those are things that you can't really fix with money. You can try to make people whole, but there is a very good argument that somebody could have gotten a raise, they could have gotten a better job, and that raise over the course of the rest of their life, or rest of their working lives at least, could be well over $1 million when they were being paid high amounts, $100,000-$200,000 a year. Moving on, Tears of the Kingdom surpasses 10 million sales in 3 days. We talked about that. Valve being sued. We talked about that. EA paying the college football players for their likeness. We talked about that. And then Sega may also start charging for $70 for its games. We talked about that. Although they are using a different image here of a game I couldn't even name. Like a Dragon Ishin, I guess, is what this is from. Alright, let's start looking at the new games. This could be a really long process. Hopefully it isn't. It inherently doesn't have to be that long of a process anyways, even if there is a lot of games. Because of all the games that get released are garbage, it's pretty easy to move forward. I feel like the Super Bunny Man existed already. Did it just come out of early access? Yeah. This game just came out of early access, so I'll make a YouTube short around it because of that, but I'm not going to put it on the follow list. First person shooting asset flip game, it looks like. Paint by pixel. It doesn't look terrible. I don't want it on the follow list too. I think maybe I need to be more realistic around a lot of the games getting on the follow list. Like, otherwise I'm going to create a situation where I'm cleaning up the follow list just to make it messy again for no good reason. when I really wouldn't ever bother um, to potentially buy a lot of the games on the fall list. This is an odd collection of what looks like match 3 and card games. We have a jigsaw puzzle game. 1001 Jigsaw Detective. Again, maybe make a YouTube short around it. Hawken Reborn. Mostly negative. Still in early access. Maybe has a release date now. Chicken Tricks. Play as a chicken. I kind of like the idea of playing as a chicken in what is sort of a top-down twin-stick shooter, but I don't think they've implemented the visuals quite right. Here we have a match 3 adult game called Fancy! Anime girl with big boobs, different cosplay designs, outfits, and that seems to be about it. Dressed up as a succubus, demon, maid, things like that. The game is $4.79, English only, and honestly not really anything more to say, so I will take that as an opportunity to not spend 5 minutes talking about an adult game. Tavern of Empire just looks like an RPG game. At this point, I don't even care to call them RPG Maker games. I should just call them RPG games and say, you know what? I'm not interested in your standard 8-bit RPG looking game. I think we can say no to Roguebot because it's too generic of a thumbnail, which is a weird reason to say no, certainly. Groob. Looks like it might be an interesting collectible card game. We have 2 of the same thing. Yes, we do. Nocturnal. Looks like a side-scrolling game. Where did that jump me? Jumped me way back. Right, we're in a weird position now. Means I've got to figure out where I was and work my way through that. Okay. Seems like we found ourselves. Alien Tower Defense. It doesn't look quite good enough. It looks more like a mobile game. Magic Machine Gun doesn't look like enough. Nosy Little Fly. Looks like it's got a level of polish to it. Level of Joe Biden, the dating simulator, which I assume this is just a kind of joke game. What's interesting about this is A, it's not having any adult content in it, which you could certainly see it go that direction. But B, this would seemingly violate the new code of conduct and rules as far as targeting an actual person. And this is what I said here. Yeah, it looks like there's probably going to be some censorship instead. I have no idea who this character is supposed to be, or for that matter, this character. To just throw a character named Joe Biden in here. Yep. So, one of the rules was to not target real people, and clearly they're targeting a real political figure here, although they're doing a particularly terrible job of making this actually look like Joe Biden, which would just make me assume that this was a Japanese dating simulator that was really, really terrible at some point, or is halfway in development, and they just said, hey, let's just say this old guy looks like Joe Biden, and put it out as a joke. There's no reason to put this on the fall list, though. And so obviously political figures are still going to be allowed. So we're still going to see Trump games. We're still going to see Joe Biden games. Probably see a increase in those kinds of games. In particular, as the U.S. election cycle increases. This game says in general it has sexual content and noticeably has an 18 plus free patch. It's called Sundari Milfin, which I guess is subtitled Office Harem. That being said, I don't know if this is really what you would expect from a tsundere, because you generally see tsunderes as not smiling, and usually I would think as having kind of glasses. The Milfin part, I assume, is that she's a mother, or supposed to be like a mother-like character, which then you're combining two fetishes together in a tsundere and a MILF, which doesn't really make a lot of sense. And then you're also adding harem ideas of having multiple girls, but noticeably I am not really seeing a lot of multiple girls here. I'm seeing one character being shown over and over again. So I can only assume that this is a terrible match 3 game that is trying to sell on adult content that may or may not be there, but is definitely selling on throwing out as many key phrases as possible. Noticeably, it says it has full English audio, which I doubt, and then Russian is its second language, which makes me definitely suspect that this might be a Russian attempt at making some money more than making a good game. Let's see, Bricks Crusher, Breaker Ball. This doesn't look terrible as far as a breakout clone. Game called It's Ticking, as far as a bomb defusal puzzle game. Doesn't look terrible. Vacuum cleaner robot simulator looks like garbage, and I'd be a little concerned that you aren't actually running some real vacuum cleaner somewhere playing a game like that, that they're just outsourcing the AI that you would need in a robot vacuum cleaner to avoid obstacles. It's probably not what's happening though. That would take a lot of programming that most game developers wouldn't bother with. The American War, which is an interesting phrase to call the Vietnam War, but I guess it's as much the American War as it is the Vietnam conflict. But nobody in the United States calls it the American War, because America's been at war with so many other people. If you said the American War, you probably would mean the American War of Independence in the United States, or possibly the Civil War against the North and South states. Really wouldn't mean Vietnam. People in the United States don't talk about Vietnam much at all, since they effectively botched and lost that war. There's nothing here though that looks like an actual game. Let's see. Lips. Looks like it might be something of interest. Cubic figures doesn't. This is very colorful, and sometimes I bristle at seeing a whole bunch of color, but I think that may just be for this trailer. No, I think it is just very colorful. Although, my main problem isn't having a color palette that has lots of colors. It is very difficult to get that right when you have more than 4 or 5 colors in your color palette, or even more than 2 or 3 primary colors in your color palette. My main problem usually is when there's bright neon lights like this all over the screen in front of what you're supposed to be seeing, explosions and things like this. This is actually fairly easy to see in motion because the characters stand out well enough. So I don't have any major concerns visually there. Looks like it's a RPG game and looks decent enough to go on the following list. Darwin's Trash looks kind of like a troll game. I could see weird creatures working, but you'd have to have a consistent art style there, and you'd have to have more of a game. The fact that this looks so much different from this is a problem, and this being your main game as far as a Bubble Bobble clone is a problem. Next we have a game called Rebellion. Yeah, we have what they say is a tower defense game, but does not look like a tower defense game to me. If it is, it's unique enough that I think it deserves a follow. I guess it is, but it's just at a different scale with a lot more variety looking to it. If this was one giant castle and you're just like trying to defend floor after floor after floor, that's certainly an idea to improve tower defense instead of tower defense levels just being random levels. This Love Exalt 8372 looks interesting. Not as polished as I might like it, but you've got some major character designs here, trying different things. Matcher Now Hiring. Looks like a match 3 game. Seems to me like it's supposed to be player versus player, but it is single player only. Weird. Weird enough to keep my attention. Assassin, the first list, feels like a AA game out of nowhere, so we'll give that a chance. Next we have a game called Mire, M-I-R-E. Looks like it's a match 3 game with some 2D anime type mythical creatures, succubus, satyrs, things like that on the side. Perhaps a little inconsistent with the different art style, and there's only one nude screenshot in this whole thing, which makes me wonder if there's not much here. They are also violating the new rules by saying flow update on the thumbnail when Steam has said specifically not to do that. It says it has Japanese full audio and English full audio, which I question. Just don't think that there's enough quality or enough game here though for the $4.49 for a match 3 game. Some of the match 3 screenshots also have the playfield tilted for some reason. And the backgrounds feel asset flippy too. So I'd have to say no to Mire. Greedventory. Seems to be heavily focused around an RPG and collecting items. There might be an idea around that, certainly. Or collecting money. Starship Troopers Extermination, just for the name recognition, deserves a follow. Nova's Castle, on the other hand, doesn't. This is more in line with the kind of neon explosions that fill the screen and are distracting. Eye of Saccharin is what I think that word is. Might be something to this. I assume this is just a visual novel. Let's see. Hate Free Heroes RPG 2020 2D 3D RPG enhanced. Modern day role-playing game that takes place in the role of an HFH agent and researches dedicated to decreasing the rise of agromites in the city. So this almost feels like this is an anti-hate message done in a low effort RPG maker style, which, while applaudable, certainly doesn't justify putting the game on the follow list or playing it. Seems like that they're fairly committed as being the publisher and developer under the name Hate Free Heroes. Love Boot Camp Couples Edition. Is this a shared split screen game? Do I think that there's a real game here? Though, no. Small World Golf. Looks like there might be something to that. Okay, and so I thought there would be a lot of new games, but it seems like we're doing fairly well. I feel like this Love on Leave, though, is going to get 2 or 3 YouTube shorts. Whatever. It kind of doesn't even matter, though, because I doubt very many people are seeing all the YouTube shorts anyways. Do YouTube shorts repeat if you've seen them once before? I don't even know. Does YouTube this week even care about YouTube shorts? I don't even know. At a certain level, I question whether they care about live streams anymore, but it would be very weird to stop doing the live streams, particularly since I've finally managed to make live streams work for me instead of work against me at some level, as far as looking at new video games and being aware of them and talking about video game news and being aware of that, going back to the darkness and just not following any of the information or doing it off screen wouldn't be more efficient. Anyways, that's going to be it for this stream. I'm very possibly will play some more Yu-Gi-Oh! Off screen. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. If you want a friend or follow me on any social media sites, there's a whole bunch of links down below. And if you want to support me further, there's a link to Patreon, or you can friend me on Steam and get me a game off my wish list. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.